There's a 1970 Dodge Challenger sitting in a temperature-controlled garage in Bakersfield, California. The tires haven't touched asphalt in 8 years. The alpine white paint still holds its shine under a single hanging bulb. A set of original Hearst floor mats, still in their plastic wrapping, sit on a shelf above the workbench like something preserved for a museum. Every Sunday morning, a 69-year-old man named Walter drives to that garage before his family wakes up, pulls the cover back just far enough to rest his hand on the hood, and stays there for a while. His son called it a phase when it started. 8 years later, nobody calls it a phase anymore. Last summer, a collector from Phoenix sent Walter a certified check for $58,000. Walter mailed it back uncashed with a single sentence written on a notepad: "Not for sale." This isn't the behavior of a man who doesn't understand value. Something far deeper is happening in that garage, and it started long before Walter ever owned that car. To understand it properly, you have to go back to what America felt like in the years after World War II. Families that had stretched ration books and repaired the same pair of shoes 3 times were suddenly buying houses in new subdivisions. And parked in those driveways under the California sun or the Ohio frost were automobiles that meant something no appliance had ever meant before. A father who spent a Saturday afternoon polishing a 1961 Impala wasn't just cleaning a car. He was making a statement to the neighborhood, to his children watching from the front step, that the years of holding your breath were finally over. Those children didn't process that scene analytically. They absorbed it the way children absorb everything foundational, through their nervous systems, before language could name it. The car became synonymous with safety, with arrival, with proof that a family had made it through. By the time those same children turned 16 and 17, something was already happening inside their developing brains that researchers in autobiographical memory identify as the reminiscence bump. Studies have consistently shown that emotional experiences occurring between the ages of 15 and 25 are encoded with a depth and permanence that no other decade of life can match. The brain during those years isn't simply collecting memories. It is building a self. Every charged experience from that window, the first solo drive down an empty highway, the sound of an engine turning over on a cold morning, the feeling of being 19 and completely in control of something powerful, those don't become memories in any ordinary sense. They become architecture. Autobiographical memory theory explains why. Emotional memories formed during identity-building years don't get stored as simple recollections to be visited occasionally. They become the actual template the brain uses to define who a person is. The first time Walter drove alone on an open California highway at 19, windows down, engine pulling hard into the night, that moment didn't get filed away as a pleasant memory. It became part of the structural answer to the question every young person is trying to answer: who am I and what am I capable of?
Then the machines arrived that made that question feel like a declaration worth shouting. Between 1964 and 1973, American automakers produced cars that were not built for practicality or fuel economy. They were built around the psychological hunger of young men who needed to feel significant. The Plymouth Roadrunner, introduced in 1968, was designed from the ground up as a back-to-basics performance machine. 383 cubic inches of V8, stripped of everything unnecessary, priced so that a 22-year-old working a factory job could actually buy one. The Oldsmobile 442, which became a standalone model in 1968, was praised by every automotive publication of the era as the most balanced muscle car on the market. These weren't vehicles in the ordinary sense, they were identity instruments. A young man who saved 7 months of paychecks to buy one wasn't making a transportation decision. He was purchasing a version of himself, the capable version, the powerful version, the version that didn't have to explain himself to anyone. The culture poured fuel on all of it. In 1971, a film called Vanishing Point put a white 1970 Dodge Challenger RT on an open American highway and made the argument, without a single explanatory line of dialogue, that a man and a machine moving at full speed toward an uncertain destination was the most honest portrait of freedom available. Barry Newman's Kowalski didn't explain himself. Audiences didn't need him to. Young men across the country didn't watch that film and admire it from a comfortable distance. They recognized something in it they couldn't name but felt completely. The car wasn't layered onto the story as a symbol. The car was the story. And then, 2 years later, without warning, everything was taken. In October 1973, the OPEC oil embargo hit the United States with a force the muscle car industry had no framework to absorb. Gasoline prices quadrupled almost overnight. The 55-mile-per-hour national speed limit arrived, making high-displacement engines feel suddenly absurd. And then came the regulations. The Chevrolet Chevelle SS454, which had produced 450 horsepower in 1970, had fallen to 245 horsepower by 1973 as emissions controls dismantled the engines from the inside. The Dodge Challenger was discontinued after 1974. The Plymouth Barracuda, gone. The Pontiac GTO, gone. The muscle car didn't fade through natural succession or gradual disinterest. It was canceled.
And here is where loss aversion, one of the most thoroughly documented principles in behavioral psychology, begins to explain what happened inside the minds of the men who lived through it. Research consistently shows that losses register in the human brain with roughly twice the psychological intensity of equivalent gains. But when the loss is connected to identity rather than simply to possession, that intensity multiplies in ways that standard economic models cannot capture. The young men who had their era taken from them didn't just lose cars they liked. They lost the external confirmation of who they were. And the cars that survived became something no price tag has ever accurately reflected. Psychologists who study object attachment have documented a specific pattern that clarifies what happened next. The bonds people form with objects connected to interrupted identity, things taken before a person was ready to release them, are significantly more durable and emotionally charged than bonds formed under ordinary circumstances. The mind does not process forced loss the way it processes natural endings. It freezes at the moment before the loss. It preserves. The classic car that remained became the last physical evidence of a self the world had decided to discontinue. Not a collectible, not an asset, a confirmation. It was never the car. It was the 23-year-old behind the wheel who never got a proper ending and who has been living in that Bakersfield garage for 8 years waiting for one. What Walter's son sees when he looks at that Challenger is a problem with a clean, logical solution. Sell it, deposit the check, use the money for something real. But what he cannot see is that his father isn't holding on to a machine. He's holding on to the last remaining confirmation that the version of himself he most recognizes actually existed. Identity continuity theory describes the deep psychological need humans have to experience an unbroken thread of self across time, to feel that who you were connects meaningfully to who you are now. For Walter's generation, one external support after another has quietly gone dark. The career ended on a fixed date. The physical capability that once felt permanent has been receding for 20 decades. The cultural era that formed him has been reclassified from living memory into historical archive. The Challenger stayed lit. Letting go of it isn't a financial decision. It is consenting to sever the last visible thread back to the self that felt most fully alive. And somewhere between those two silences lives everything this generation was never once given the chance to. If this video made you see someone in your life a little differently, this channel is dedicated to the psychology behind the human behaviors most people dismiss without ever trying to understand.
subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because the most important stories are almost always the ones hiding in plain sight.